Welcome to the Stark Contrast podcast. I'm Kyle,
I'm Cooper.
and we're wrestling with topics revolving around leadership, culture, and performance. Why is Stark Contrast? One, father son. Two, he's tech savvy, I'm not. And three, hopefully a little deeper dive than buzzwords, pop culture, popular opinion as we wrestle with these different topics. So we invite you along in this journey and hope you enjoy.
All right, let's go.
Awesome, Coop. Well, what topic we got this week?
We have leading by example. And one of the reasons that this came to mind is last week's podcast. We kind of talked about it a little bit. But I often wonder, like, for myself, what does it mean to lead by example and how to best do it?
Awesome. We probably heard some banging in the background. House is under construction, so under remodel. So that should be a nice little extra challenge for us to stay focused as we have this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Awesome. So as you think about leading by example, what's that mean to you? How would you define it? Yeah, let's start there.
So I think leading by example really comes back to holding yourself to the same standard that you hold everyone else to. And I think that that's probably the biggest part of it. But I would say also it's just that treat others the way you want to be treated, right? So you're not just always getting on people for screwing up when you screw up the same amount.
So some consistency there, right?
Yeah.
So as you think about leading by example, and I think, spending time with a bunch of different, especially athletes over the years, there's a couple places where I think this can get tripped up. And I think to start with, there's that line that, more is caught than taught, right? So we'd rather see a sermon than hear one. So the idea of leading by example is a great one. Like we gotta set the tone and influence people that way. I see a couple spots where this, where we can get a little bit disconnected with this. And then so I'm gonna throw out a couple of the traps and love to hear just your take on them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the first one that'll happen is sometimes people will be like, well, I just like to lead by example. And it can almost become an excuse not to lead in other ways, which can ultimately become a matter of just really focusing on your own situation and just doing your own thing, which I heard one guy say one time, he was talking about leading by example. If it's like setting a really high standard for yourself, holding yourself accountable, performing at the highest level, doing your job, like that's called doing your job. That's not something more than that. It's not like that is all of leadership. So I think the first one is sometimes people can use that as an excuse not to lead. As I share that, what does that maybe mean to you? Where have you maybe seen that play out?
Well, I think oftentimes it's people fall into one of two categories, like the people who want to be very vocal leaders, and then there's also the people that they want to lead, but they don't really want to ever have the vocal responsibility of getting on people. They want to just do their job and hope everyone else picks up on the idea of doing their job. And I think both ways are incomplete in that someone who just wants to be a vocal leader, I notice a lot of times, especially with my team, is that those vocal leaders aren't practicing what they're preaching. They're not putting in all the work to make them respected by the other guys. But at the same time, the guys that are quiet, they're putting in all the work and they should be respected, but the guys don't respect them because they're not personable or they're just not friends. So there's no respect there.
And do you think maybe even sometimes it's not even so much that there's not respect, it's that they've earned the respect, but they're not leveraging that respect. Like they've earned the right to speak, but maybe they're not speaking, so there's a gap there.
Yeah, I would say more of that. That's probably more fair than what I said.
I love what you said in terms of those two spectrums, and they're both incomplete. Because the second trap I see with people that talk about the whole lead by example is there's a gap between what they say is the standard and maybe what we're actually living out, right? So leading by example means that our behaviors are at such a high level that it elevates people around us, as opposed to a minimum standard, right? It's a higher bar. And so like you talked about, maybe the vocal leader is talking a big game, but maybe the actions don't match that, so there's a gap there.
Yeah, for sure.
So as you think about a more complete look at leadership, you've got an element of leading by example. You also have an element of vocal. If I were to say 0 to 100, 100%, or you've got 100%, a whole pie, what percent do you think is example and what percent do you think is vocal? Just out of a guess.
75% example and then 25% vocal.
Awesome.
And it might even be 80-20.
And this is a very high level study you've just conducted, right?
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I spent a whole lot of time researching this topic.
The point is, whether it's 75-80, I'd be curious what other people think, but regardless, the point is that the vast majority comes back to, like we talked about, in terms of people would rather see a sermon than hear one. We want to see the standard as opposed to just hear the standard, right?
Yeah, but I would say at the same time, we can't, I mean, we just talked about it. You have to at least let people know when they're not succeeding, when they're not following the standard.
So this is good. So if we talk about that 75 to 80% of modeling the behavior we want to instill in others, right? What are some keys to that being really effective?
I think we had so this is an example here. We had a leadership guy come in for our football team last year. I didn't really like him, but he did say one thing that was really interesting to me, and that was when one bad moment doesn't make you like a bad leader, but if you sway constantly, then if you're 70% of the time a good leader, and then 30% of the time you're a bad leader, you're just a mediocre leader. You're not even. So I think like realizing that the percentage of the time where you have to be elite, be almost perfect, and it doesn't have to be perfect, right? I mean, everybody's going to screw up, but it has to almost be 90% of the time you have to be doing the right thing the way that it's supposed to be done. And when you screw up, you have to admit it, and then you fix it, and then you don't repeat it. And I thought that was really enlightening, even though I didn't feel like I got a lot out from him in other ways. I felt like that was one of the best things he said.
Which is a great takeaway, right? Like we can learn something from everybody, and we're constantly trying to make sense of things and try to figure this whole leadership journey out better. So I think that's a great reminder of we can be ready to learn from anybody. I love what you said in terms of, I don't think people expect perfection from us, but they do expect us to maybe set the tone or paint a picture of what right looks like. But as a leader, nobody's expecting us to be perfect, so we shouldn't expect ourselves to be perfect. When I say that, how have you maybe wrestled with that in your own leadership journey?
I think for me, I very much like to be perfect, but I also have an explosive temper. And I mean, you know that. I mean, I put in a piece of gum every time I wanted to yell at my teammates in baseball. So I think that just obviously I need to put my mind into being a very good leader and put a lot of my energy into doing that. Otherwise, I can lose it. But at the same time, it is a little bit easier it's relaxing to say, to not have the stress on me to be perfect the whole time. And I think that that's really important, because when I'm relaxed, not only am I a better player on the football field, but I'm also a better teammate.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, so that puts us at ease. Nobody's expecting us to be perfect. Let's have a high bar. Let's pursue that. But I think you touched on something else that's critical, is then when we do screw up, we've got to be transparent and vulnerable with that and admit it, fix it, don't repeat it. Right. So as you think about that and how you handle that, how do you feel like that gets received when the leader owns up to their own mistakes?
Well, I think it's very important for the leader to own up to their mistakes, as we've talked about. But I would say that, like, when I let someone know, hey, I screwed up there, that was my fault, then the people who are watching me, not only from a teammate perspective, but just as even some younger guys that might look up to me, when I say, hey, I screwed up, I need to be better, they're like, oh wow, he's serious about what not only needed to have happened, but also that he's serious about, he cares about us.
Yeah, I think as you touch on that, it's cool. As you talk about leading by example, it's really, again, coming back to modeling the behavior we want to instill in others. Well, I'm showing that we should own up to our mistakes, right? So I truly am leading by example, even in my failures, by showing what is that supposed to look like. I love that what you said too is ultimately people follow. They've got to feel connected, right? So they got to feel like you care about them. And so by showing that vulnerability, it allows us to actually connect with each other better as human beings, and not feel like, well, it's a robot and perfection and whatever else. It helps narrow that gap to allow us to connect better as people. Where have you maybe seen that in terms of how you've received it, or on the other end in terms of modeling that for others?
I think when so listening to, like, I would actually say that it's more of an example of hypocritical nature here, where it's coaches that will say, hey, you're not allowed to cuss. And then I'll overhear them cussing, and I'll be like, dude, what are you doing? Like, it's not that it's a problem from, like, obviously I don't think you should be cussing, but it's not that it's a problem for me that you cussed. It's a problem that you're telling everybody else not to, and then you're doing it. So that's really where I think is some of the, like, that's one of the most irritating things for me, I would say.
So as you touch on that, like, it's not about the cussing, it's about the inconsistency, right? And it's amazing as I've spent time around a lot of different athletes and have asked them best leader, best coach that they've ever played for, and then asked them why. A lot of times they've said it's because I knew exactly what I was going to get from them. They were the same guy every single day. And whether it was good, bad, ugly, whatever else, they knew exactly what they were going to get, which provided some stability and consistency, which allowed them to be at ease and free up and go be themselves. And so really, as you talk about leading by example, it's a consistency of things to provide some stability. Ideally, it's in a way that has a really high standard to show what right looks like. But that consistency, which is what you're getting at, is when there's a disconnect, that's where we undermine trust. So just talk to me a little bit more about that in terms of maybe some coaches that you've played for that have modeled that have showed that really good, or some teammates that were great leaders where that what has that consistency meant to you?
Well, I think consistency really, I mean, you hear the saying, consistency is key. Like, I don't think people realize how true that is, right? Because if someone screws up once, oh well, they screwed up, just fix it. But if it's a habit of continually screwing up, then it's a problem, right? But at the same time, you're talking about people who, I mean, coaches at the highest level, they're there every day, they're consistent. And so for me, when you have a coach that's showing up every day with same energy, same drive, same attitude, same expectations, it's easier to perform because you know what you have to do. You just go out and do it, and that's it. That's the end of that.
You know, you touched on it. You said, hey, you hear consistency is important. What was your quote? Consistency is key. And then we say, but that's kind of boring, right? That's not exciting. That's not gonna win any awards for great, powerful. That's not gonna be the tweet of the day. But how hard is consistency, right? How important is consistency and how hard is it? And it's interesting, quick story, and then love to hear how this has played out for you. We used to talk a lot about that on any given night in any minor league ballpark, you'll see major league ability. The question is do you see it the next night? It's this idea of consistency. And a lot of times we focus on the biggest impact as opposed to how consistent can I show up every day? How consistent can I bring the right attitude and effort every single day, every single moment, every single interaction, no matter whether it's good or bad? And that consistency is kind of boring, but it is a huge separator impact and is really hard.
Well, you were talking about consistency. I mean, you go look at the greatest player of all time in every sport. It's not a player who had one big season and then fell off. They might have been the best player in the world ever for that one season. But you look at guys like Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, Wayne Gretzky, those guys, you're saying, wow, they did this for a long time and they were really good. It wasn't that they were the best player in the league a couple of years, but they weren't that every year. But yet they're still the greatest players of all time in those sports.
Yeah, they're not known for their peak. Their peaks were really good, but it was how consistently did they, push up against that peak. And so that's obviously from a performance standpoint. How do you get that? It's the consistency in the work, the preparation to get there, which again, not super sexy, pretty boring, but absolutely critical. But even from a leadership standpoint, as we talk about this in terms of it's not about, hey, great locker room speech, halftime locker room speech. It's the consistency of the moments that's ultimately impacting us. And so as we talk about leading by example, that's where that consistency shows up. So as you think about yourself leading by example, when you're at your best, what's that consistency look like? And then what maybe derails you?
I don't know that this is necessarily like something that changes very often for me, because I have not been a good job. We talked about the vocal part being 25%. I don't know that I have done a very good job of using that 25% successfully. So I think when I'm at my best, I'm probably a bit more vocal just because I am generally pretty quiet, and I'm not gonna say, I'll take someone aside and say, hey, we need to do this, but I'm not gonna go up in front of the whole team and say, hey, we have to be better, we have to do this, even though I feel that I have earned the right to do that. I just don't feel very comfortable doing it. So it's something that I need to do more of. So I think I'm at my best when I'm communicating well, but it's something that I need to get better at.
So this is awesome. So let's shift a little bit into the 25%. Because I think a lot of times when we think about the 25%, the vocal side, or the 20%, you even, said maybe it's 20 to 25%. A lot of times we go to the enforcement side, right? The challenge side, the higher standard side, the give feedback side. And that's incomplete too, right? I mean, when you think about the vocal side, there's the encouragement side and the enforcement side. And so, John Maxwell's line about how do you know if somebody needs encouragement? they're breathing. We all need encouragement. And I think just even as you talked about the vocal side, how well that plays out, a lot of times it's because we have too narrow of a focus of the vocal side where it's just the enforcement piece and we forget the encouragement piece. I love what you said in terms of when I'm at my best, I'm consistently communicating with my teammates, which isn't just a matter of giving feedback. So as I share that, what's that mean to you?
I would say, well, I see it whenever we go and do our 7-on-7s this summer. We're supposed to be communicating on defense, letting them know there's a crosser in front of us. We got to let people know. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but we need to always be doing that. And that's just from a performance standpoint. That's going to help us succeed, not even from leadership necessarily, just being loud. Same thing in basketball when you say talk on defense, say who you got, yell for help, tell them who has help. It's the same thing. It's just you have to let your teammates know. And I think it really starts on the field when, as we talk about vocal leadership, it's being the one who's communicating to everyone to begin with. And then you get to the point where you can say, hey man, I think we need to be a little bit better here, and here's why.
Yeah, you think that about that communication obviously is going to help from a task execution standpoint, right? But you're more connected. So you've probably earned the right to then, challenge or give some feedback or whatever else because you're already connected, as opposed to, hey, where's this coming from? As you were talking there, two quick thoughts that came to mind. I think the first is a lot of times we've jacked up our definition of what leadership is, right? And a lot of times we think about it somebody giving a big speech in the locker room, or it's somebody blowing somebody up for not meeting a standard. And leadership's way broader than that. Like, that's such a sliver. I love how you started this whole thing by talking about it's an incomplete view of leadership. If it's just leading by example, or if it's just vocal leadership, it's an incomplete view. The second thing, just as you were talking, I thought about, so Dan Hefner at Dallas Baptist University baseball, they talk about consistent energy. And he talks about, how do we have consistent energy? We're consistently talking the game. We're consistently communicating. If I'm consistently communicating, I've got good energy. It's not a false energy. So just as you were talking there, it's like, how consistently am I communicating with my teammates? How connected am I with my teammates? Which allows us to encourage, allows us to challenge, allows us to be connected, allows us to have a pulse of where everybody's at. We're connected with each other, which allows me to walk alongside of them better.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes, as I was talking about the incomplete part, when I say incomplete, I don't mean that it's wrong by any stretch of the imagination, right? Because a lot of the times we say incomplete and everyone's like, oh, then it's just wrong. No, it's you 100% have to lead by example, and you 100% have to be a vocal leader. But they work in tandem. They're not mutually exclusive. You can't say, oh, well, I'm just going to be a vocal leader. That's not how that works. You have to be both. You have to hold yourself to the standard, and you have to let other people know what the standard is.
Just like you can't say, oh, I'm just an enforcer, or I'm just an encourager, right? It's a combination of all these things. I'm hearing from you. Again, I think a lot of times when we think about a lot of topics, but as we're talking about this leadership thing, we can think about an either or as opposed to a both and how do these things fit together and how connected are they? And then ultimately, what does it look like for you? Because it's going to look different for you than it is for me. And if I'm trying to just copy somebody else, I'm probably not being consistent. Again, coming back to that word that we've talked a lot about, because I'm not being true to myself. As we talk through this, what's something that's maybe crystallizing for you as you talk about leading by example and or just your own leadership journey?
I think that, well, as I've talked, I need to communicate better. And I think at the beginning I was thinking, oh, I need to be more vocal. I don't know that that's the case. I just need to communicate better. I need to let people know. I need to start off by letting them know what I'm seeing in the game and communicating, letting them know, hey, there's a guy crossing here, and then we can talk about the game. And I think that's why I have a pretty good relationship with some of the linebackers, because it's easier for me to talk the game with them because they understand the game better. So if I begin to talk the game with guys like the receivers and the quarterbacks and the O-line and D-line, then I can slowly build a better relationship to the point where they're comfortable with me saying, hey guys, I think we need to pick this up. And it's not even like I'm, oh, pick it up right now or whatever. It's just that. It's, hey, I think we need to pick this up.
Yeah, I'm hearing from you. If I'm talking the game consistently, that means we're walking along this journey together. We're connected. We're valuing each other's opinions. If I'm not doing that, there's a gap in separation there. And so that if I weigh in, it's almost like, oh, well, Cooper thinks he has the answer here. But if we're talking the game and it's a back and forth, because again, talking the game, communication's a two-way street, then there's more of a back and forth as opposed to a top down or whatever else. I've narrowed that gap and I feel connected, which at the end of the day, as a leader, that's what I'm trying to do, is to make sure that we're all aligned, all in the same team, pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the idea of leadership is a pyramid, but the leaders aren't at the top, the leaders are at the bottom, and they're bringing everyone else up. So if I'm communicating, then we can build up our weakest link and push them up, and they can be the best. And they can learn how to communicate correctly, and then they can bring the next group of people, and they can build them up, and you can be the base for the next group of people, and it can go for years.
That model, as you think about that in terms of really supporting or serving or adding value to others, I think a separator for leaders, coaches, captains, teammates is the ability to give critical feedback in a way that's received, right? In order to give feedback that may or may not be what people want to hear without that person resenting you, right? Where it's received. And I think as you're talking about, if I see my job as ultimately supporting, serving, adding value to others, my heart, my approach is going to be way different as I give some of that feedback. And then people are going to feel connected to me and receive that way differently, and allows that to be way more effective. All the while, we're recognizing that that is a small sliver as we talk about all the things I need to do as a leader. It's not just the ability to give that, that constructive feedback.
Yeah, and I think that having your teammates or the people you're coaching realize that, no, I really do love you. Like, this is for your good. It's not because I'm just saying, hey, I hate you, you're going to do it this way. It's because, no, the team needs to get better, and I'm hoping you can also get better. I think that that's really important as well.
And I want you to help me get better, right? Where it's this connected, where we're on the same page, that we're really in this together. Maybe we'll have to unpack love one of these weeks. I love you, man.
I love you, man. ELE.
Awesome. Any final closing thoughts for you?
Nope. I think thank you for the conversation. Very excited to do this again next week, see where this goes. Thank you guys for joining us on our journey. Can't wait to continue it.
Thanks, Coop.